All right, so in-text citations. This, of course, concerns the body of your essay and all of the research that you gather when you have to write a research paper, right? So all sources, whether they're quoted, meaning, direct quotes, word for word, whether they're paraphrased, put in your own words, or just simply referred to, like, this study found this result out, right? All sources quoted, paraphrased, or referred to in the text must be cited. And these citations in the body of the text must, first of all, follow a specific format, which is author date for APA. And by date, I mean the year. Sometimes you're also required to provide the page number specifically for direct quotations, right? And these in-text citations in the body of your essay should also correspond to your reference page at the end, where you list all of your source information and details about where to find those sources, okay? So in other words, if you mention a source in the text, then it should be on your reference page as well, and vice versa. If a source is on your reference page, it should also be mentioned in the text. And so APA style doesn't really use that bibliography approach, where sometimes you're asked to present a bibliography, and a bibliography may provide information on all of the sources that you consulted as you did your research, but not necessarily included in your paper. So APA really just requires you to cite the sources that you refer to. Now, when you cite page numbers, you will use P if it's a single page number, or PP with a period behind each of them if it's a page range, or if it's a series of numbers. So when citing sources in the text, there are two main ways to do it. One way is called a parenthetical citation, and the other way is called a narrative citation. A parenthetical citation means that you cite the source in parentheses, usually at the end of the sentence. Sometimes it may be mid-sentence, depending on the construction of the sentence, okay? But the idea is that the full citation is found within parentheses. And we see that in this first example. And this is a paraphrase because we don't see any quotation marks. So remember, when we paraphrase something, we put it in our own words. So in one study that consisted of 467 young adults, it was found that, etc. And then at the end, we see the source of that information is Berryman et al. Et al means and others, comma, and then the date is provided, which for APA style is the year. In the second example, the source that's referred to has been integrated into the body or the text of the sentence itself. And so that's why it's called a narrative citation. Now, when you make reference to the source within the sentence, then you should immediately follow that source with the date, the year, okay? So we see Berryman et al. 2018 sampled 467 young adults, and the same information is provided, all right? So those are the two basic ways to cite sources, whether it's parenthetical, sort of at the end, in parentheses, or narrative, where the source is integrated into the text of the sentence. And we'll look at a couple more examples of these.
Does it matter if we mix the usage?
Okay, so no, it it actually, I think, enlivens the paper when you do it in a number of ways. There are some rules about how frequently you have to cite the year if you have a narrative citation. So let's say, for instance, in one particular paragraph, all of the information that you summarize is actually from Berryman et al. Once it's clear to readers in the way that you write your sentences that all of this information is coming from this one source, then no, you don't have to put the parenthetical citation after every sentence, right? But you definitely need to cite the source the first time mentioned within within a particular paragraph. That only applies to the narrative citation, by the way, not parenthetical. I don't know if that was clear, but I'll clear it up a little later when we look at another example. Yes?
I have a question. When we do the citation, do we write it in a different font?
You mean, what do you mean by the citation?
I mean, the parenthetical, when you said one study that consisted, which is taking exactly from the text or something, do we write it in a different font?
No. Both of these examples show that the writer has put the information in their own words. But I mean, it just,
okay.
Yeah, it's just sometimes you have to change the wording a bit in order for the narrative citation to work. You know what I mean? Because you're incorporating the author into you're incorporating the author into the sentence. So usually there's a verb that follows the author's name when you use the narrative citation. So Berryman sampled, Berryman discovered, Berryman, and so on. I think I cover that a bit later.
Hi, I have a question.
Yes.
As far as the in-text citation, let's just say that I am reading a research, and within that research, they themselves had cited, I guess, their source.
Right.
Now I want to use the same piece of information. I want to use that particular information. Now, how do I then cite? Do I cite the main text or the main research paper that I'm using?
Okay.
Or do I cite both?
That is an excellent question. And it shows up, I think, about 4 or 5 slides in. So I will answer you.
Okay.
I will get to that. So,
okay.
Yeah. All right. So great question, though, because that's an issue. So now we're looking at a direct quotation, because remember the first example that I just showed you is really paraphrase, put in my own words. I'm just sort of summarizing what the writer said. So, but sometimes you may quote the writer directly. Now, I will say that APA prefers that its writers paraphrase more than they quote. And so your paper should not be direct quote heavy, right? Direct quote should be used sparingly. And some of the circumstances where APA thinks it's okay to use a direct quote is either to reproduce a definition. So someone is defining something and you really want that definition to be precise. Maybe the author expressed something in a particularly unique way that you really want to bring to your reader's attention. Or maybe you're quoting something because you want to respond directly to the idea. But under normal circumstances, you should aim to paraphrase and put it in your own words. That's the preference. But the examples that I have on the screen now show you how to cite sources directly, verbatim, word for word, right? So in the first example, we see the narrative citation, Reynolds, that's the name of the writer, followed by the year, 2019, because remember, that's what APA wants, author, date, author, date, author, date, author, date. So Reynolds, 2019, argued that, quote, dogs are more likely to form attachments to their owners. And then the page number follows. Now, when you quote a source directly, it is strongly recommended or required, really, if possible, that you indicate to the reader exactly where in the source that quotation is found, okay? So in this example, unlike the previous one, a page number is provided. And because it is the narrative citation, the first example shows a narrative citation, the page number appears at the end. And you'll notice that the punctuation for this sentence is behind the parentheses. So the punctuation does not stay with the quoted material itself, right? I think I have another example of a direct quote on the following slide. Yes, I do. All right. And so I just want to point out that with APA style, you want to make sure you choose the right verbs, choose your words carefully. You know, Reynolds argued, acknowledged, contended, stated, maintained, reported. There are lots of words you can use. And APA tends to lean more towards the use of the past tense, whereas some a style like MLA prefers present tense. So you would write Reynolds argues, or Reynolds acknowledges, or Reynolds contends. That's present tense, right? Okay, so I wanted to bring that to your attention as well. Let's look at another example, a direct quote. Interpreting these results, Smith, 2003 concluded that, quote, boys raised by single mothers are no more likely to demonstrate this trait. And again, we have the page number provided in parentheses at the end, because that's a narrative citation, meaning that the source is incorporated into the body of the sentence. But in the second example, a parenthetical citation is used, and it says, the result of this study clearly suggested that, quote, boys raised by single mothers are no more likely to demonstrate this trait, end of quote. And then the full citation is in parentheses at the end. Smith, comma, space 2003, comma, space P dot 34, close parentheses, period at the end after the parentheses. And so you have to pay attention to the spacing, to spacing, I should say, as well. You shouldn't have 2003 sort of attached to the comma and all this sort of stuff. So you have to be a little precise about that, okay? Now, these are examples of quotations that are all 40 words or less. APA provides guidelines for longer quotations of 40 words or more. And they ask you to use a block quote. This is referred to as the block quote. So you begin the quote on a new line and you block indent the quotation in the same position as a new paragraph. There are no quotation marks used in a block quotation. This should be double spaced, but you know, it's just because of the size of the screen, I couldn't really do it. So block quotes are double spaced, okay? And what you will notice also with block quotations, the punctuation mark remains with the quote, and that's different from the others that we've seen. Because remember, the full stop would usually follow the parentheses in the shorter quotes. But in the block quotation, the period remains with the quote itself. Do you see that difference? I'm going to assume you're all saying yes. I have to adjust to Zoom. Okay, so we see the citation, the author, comma, year, comma, and then we see PP, because this quote started on page 111 and actually ended on page 112. Again, everything here is invented, okay? So don't look for these sources. I'm making everything up here, right? So that's what a block quote would look like. So that's 40 words or more. And, you know, you shouldn't do that very often. I've seen students sort of like put like 3 or 4 block quotations in a 5-page paper. That's not good, right? APA says that you should limit the use of quotes. So if you use a block quotation like 1 in a 5-page paper, that's enough, because now your professor is going to think that you're just trying to make your paper longer, right? And you don't want your professor to think that. Okay. So I just want to point out that paraphrase material, and I think I touched on this already, must also be cited. So when you put something in your own words, you still have to cite the source. The page number is not required when you do so, but APA allows for it, okay? You can provide a page number if you so desire. But if you paraphrase the information, it's fine to just provide the author and the year as is presented here. Now, in this section, I just want to talk a bit about how to cite authors when there are multiple authors, right? This is the rule for APA style. If there are two authors and only two, then every time you cite that source, you should write both of their names. And so the two examples show a narrative. Hannah and Smith, 2010, demonstrated that blah, 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 blah. And the second one shows the parenthetical. If you'll notice, with the parenthetical citation, a symbol is used instead of the word and that symbol is called an ampersand, right? So with multiple authors, when there are two authors, if it's a narrative citation, write the word and. If it's a parenthetical citation, then use the ampersand. Now, this is a new rule of APA Style 7th edition. If the piece has 3 or more authors, then you just refer to the first author listed on or in the article and use the term et al, which is Latin for and others. Note that there's a period after al, right? That's a change from the 6th edition, because there used to be something like, well, if it's 3 to 5 authors, then cite the 5 authors the first time, and then the second time you'll use et al and all that. No, they cut all of that out. And the rule is, if the article has 3 or more authors, just refer to the article by the first author and et al for the in-text citations. Sometimes a group may function as the author of something. In the example highlighted in blue, the Food and Drug Administration is the group. And some groups have an acronym. It can be shortened, right? So in that case, APA says to mention the organization the first time you cite the source, either in the narrative or the parenthetical. And if you mention the group in a narrative citation, list the abbreviation before the year of publication in parentheses, separated by a comma. And the idea is, once you have written out the name of the group and then indicated its acronym, for the remainder of the paper, you can refer to that group by the acronym. And so in the first example, which is a narrative, we see Food and Drug Administration, and then in parentheses, FDA, 2019, and the quote continues. The second example shows how it would appear if it's a parenthetical citation at the end of the sentence. So you'd place FDA in brackets instead, comma, and then 2019. Sometimes, although this should not happen much when you're doing research, but sometimes a source has no known author. APA says that you are to use the first few words of the reference list entry, meaning the title of the book or the title of the article, that book or article becomes the author, so to speak, okay? So in the first example, given effects of hurricanes, I'm quoting something from a longer article called Effects of Hurricanes on Indigenous Plants, right? And so I shorten it to Effects of Hurricanes, 2016. Because I use quotation marks, that lets the reader know that this is an article that I'm quoting without an author. But in the case of the example at the bottom of the screen, World Hurricanes, that is italicized, that lets the readers know that this is the title of a book that doesn't have the author. And so when these entries show up on the reference page, you know, on the reference page, the author is listed first. So because these sources have no author, then the entry title will serve as the author and will be listed first. And when we get to references, we'll look at how to cite those. Now, this was a question that someone asked earlier about reading information in another source. So a primary source, right, reports original content. The secondary source refers to content in a information first reported in another source, all right? So we call that a secondary source citation, meaning that you didn't read the original source. You read it in someone else's work, right? First of all, APA says that you should avoid using secondary sources. Their advice is that try to find the original source, okay? And quote the original source. That's the recommendation, okay? So if you're reading it in, let's say, a journal, most likely on the reference page, that source is listed and you can find it in the original form. So that should be your first action. But sometimes you can't find it. And there may be various reasons for this. Maybe it's written in another language, or maybe it's out of print, or whatever the case may be. It's not in UB's library, whatever the case may be, right? So what do we do? The first example, so in this example I'm talking about, you read Johnson's article. It was published in 2019. That's the one you read. But he referred to something that Chernoff said back in 1983. So the first example shows you how to cite that as a parenthetical citation. So we have the information presented, and Chernoff, comma, 1983, comma, as cited in Johnson, because that's where you saw it, right? In the other example, it says, Chernoff, this is a, what do you call it, a narrative. Chernoff, 1983, indicated that the effects of the drug trade on local dealers was immeasurable, as cited in Johnson. The APA acknowledges that sometimes you may not have the year of the original source, and if that is the case, then it's just simply omitted. And so you would just write Chernoff, comma, as cited in Johnson, okay? And then on your reference page, Johnson will be listed because that's the source that you found it in. Sometimes you don't have a written source. Sometimes, I'm running out of time here. You receive information by personal communication, interviews, okay? They are not recorded on the reference page, but are only recorded in the body of the essay itself. And this slide shows how to do that. B. Anderson, personal communication, if it's a narrative citation, and then at the end for a parenthetical. I just want to draw your attention to the fact that sometimes you cite multiple sources at once if several different studies, for instance, came to the same conclusion. And so when you do that, you separate each individual source with a semicolon. These are just some additional tips. Sometimes you may have two sources that have the same surname. The year will make them distinct, but then if it's the same author, you can use initials, or there's some other little tricks too where you could add A, B, or C. I'm not going to get into those here because I'll take more time. I talked a bit about multiple citations back to back. You can cite the author the first time.
Good afternoon. I have a quick question. I don't know if you had touched on it as yet, but okay, I was given an article and I wanted to cite it, but it's in a book. Now, I'm not sure if it's another author's work within the book. How would you cite that?
So you mean like
in an essay?
You mean like it's a chapter?
No, it's actually a whole book with different articles on different subjects.
So it's like an anthology.
Within that one book.
It's a collection of writing by different authors.
Yes.
Okay, so you will
How
always.
Would you cite that?
You would cite the author of the piece. You're always citing the person who said it. So in the in-text citation, you'll cite the author of the piece. And then on your reference page, it'll be set up a certain way. And I think I get to that in one of my slides further on. But you have to quote.
Okay, thank you.
You have to quote the person who said it. So, you're always quoting the author of the piece. And that year, I mean, if it's a collection of writing, the year the book was published It's still the year that the author submitted that information.
Okay, so if the book says 1995 or 2001, that means that's the year that you would use to cite in your text citation. Like you put the author of the article, and then you put the year the book was published.
Right, that's correct.
And then the page number within that article.
Right, yes.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay. All right, so I have 15 minutes to get through. Okay, so what else was I putting on this page? Sometimes you don't use the entire quote and you use portions of it. You can use the ellipses to indicate that some words have been removed. Sometimes you have to add a word so that the quote fits, but we shouldn't do this too much, right? But you can add that by putting it in brackets, and then the reader will know that you added that word to help the flow of the sentence, okay? I have 15 minutes to get through the rest of it. So now we're going to look at references, which is the third part of my presentation, and I hope you all are still with me. So like I said,